Now, this is a bit of a different news video because when I discuss news stories, they relate around our football club. Today, my friends, I got to flip the script because we learned this morning Mourinho has been sacked by AS Roma. So in today's video, I am here to discuss, is it time for Pochettino now to start looking over his shoulder? And is it time for Mourinho to return back to our football club to complete the infamous three-peat? I'll share my thoughts and opinions. Hopefully you guys do in the comment section too, and hopefully you like the video and give it a like as well too. So my friends, let's not waste no more time and get straight into the vids. And obviously to start things off, let's kind of understand why Mourinho found himself in this situation yet again. You know, he's earned millions and millions in terms of compensation fees from being sacked, but today you can see that Mourinho really felt this one. He was upset, he was emotional, as he should be, and he'll feel like, I shouldn't have left on these terms. And in my opinion, I think this time he might feel very, very aggrieved. Now, he was relieved of his duties this morning and he has now been replaced by former legend of Roma in De Rossi, who's set to take over now. And it seems like this decision was made by the new owners of Roma, and that's Ryan and Dan Friedkin, who felt like an immediate change was needed now due to the team's underperforming nature. Currently, Roma find themselves 9th in Serie A, and after a recent loss to Lazio in the Coppa Italia, they're out of one domestic cup already. But on closer examination, you see that Roma are only 5 points off reaching top 4, and that's not too much of a, massive gap for them to be able to climb up as the season goes on. And it gets you thinking, is there more to this sacking? Was this more personal? Obviously, you could argue that, Roma's current position of 29 points in 20 games is like the worst point run since the 02-03 season under Fabio Capello. But outside of that, when you actually examine why Roma have fallen in this position this season, I think, in my opinion, you have to look at one of their most important games last season, and that was the Europa League final against Sevilla, where to this day, people feel aggrieved that the refereeing decisions cost Roma from potentially having a chance to win the cup. And the reason why I feel like this loss was so significant was because they needed to win the Europa League to get Champions League football, and by securing Champions League football, it meant that there'd be more flexibility in terms of FFP, so they could properly address improving the team. Because last summer, Roma were forced into signing many players on short-term loan deals and many players on free contracts. And most of these free contract guys haven't really worked out, like Owa, for example. And obviously most of the loan guys like Sanchez, injuries are killing his season yet again, and he's set to return later this month too. So for me, it forces a situation where Mourinho isn't able to expand and improve upon his work from last season. And I think it was desperately needed, because even in Roma's second season, he was seeing signs of underperformance. And he was noticing this in terms of their underperformance, in terms of expected assists and expected goals, because that first Roma season under Mourinho, they were absolutely on fire and they were kind of like matching their expected targets for the season. But following the second season, things started to get a bit more difficult. Of course, injuries never help, but in my opinion, I think Mourinho sometimes, or most of the time, gets figured out tactically. So without having the means to reinforce in the market, to improve upon signing proper wingbacks, or to sign proper fullbacks, or to add strength and numbers in midfield, to add more energy, to add more attacking threat, it meant that this Roma team stagnated very hard, and it felt like everything became too much, everything overspilled, and this is why you're seeing the type of season they're currently having now. Now, can Mourinho do a bit better? There's context behind this. Listen, this 3-5-2 they're using this season is dead. It doesn't help that you don't have proper good wingbacks, right? It doesn't help that your midfield is too flat. Paredes, Bove, Cristante, that's too defensive. There's not enough energy, not enough legs, not enough ability to connect the midfield and the attack as well too. And I guess it doesn't help too either when like one of your best players in Dybala has been out injured for most of this season as well too. So due to these circumstances, it's forced Mourinho to have to find a balance with what he has existing at this point in time. And unfortunately, what exists for him at this point in time ain't that great. But you could argue, are the solutions that Mourinho is finding necessarily helping turning the situation around? How often do you have to use the same midfield? Could you not give more opportunities to using younger players in the team just to help out, just to add more legs, add more energy? Because unfortunately, it continues a sign and pattern that we tend to see from Mourinho, especially when he gets to his third season, of just an entire collapse throughout the whole football club, where performances get even worse, where the real lack of attacking identity is just like blaring out in 4K. Like, you can't get past that. And week in, week out, Roma players were starting to get called factory workers, where they're literally coming in to do their shift and they're getting ready and they're looking forwards to leaving to go back home. And when you have that type of environment, it becomes very difficult to turn anything around. And maybe the Roma owners feel like, you know what, if we bring in a guy that the fans can get behind, you know, in De Rossi. We've seen this before with Frank Lampard as well too, where, you know, you try to win the fans over. Can we get some new energy out from this team with some new ideas and some new youth? Potentially, right? But I wanted to start off by mentioning this point because Mourinho's sacking, it'd be too lazy to be like, oh, he's a dinosaur tactically. You know, he always does this. His teams always get worse over time. There's always context. There's always reasons. And a lot of these issues were outside of his control. And unfortunately, I think the future would look very different for them if they were somehow able to secure Champions League football last season. That was what they were resting all their hopes on. So let's see what happens there. And even quickly, I wonder what now happens now with Lukaku, because do Roma have the money to buy him on a permanent deal? Will Lukaku even want to remain at Roma now that Mourinho has left? Could this mean that we're looking to sell him again to someone else in the summer? I mean, he does have a 37 million release clause this time. It should be a bit easier, right? Who knows what happens in that one? But right now, my friends, I want to discuss the important question. Should we potentially look to move on Pochettino to bring back Jose Mourinho? Now, I've got my opinions, but I like to understand how people feel about this. And to be fair, I can really understand if you're a supporter and believer in Jose Mourinho, why you would like to see him return back to the football club. I think one thing that's been lacking now for many, many years currently is a lack of feeling around the football club. You know, that lack of real excitement, you know, that lack of like passion, that, you know, get-togetherness that used to be typically associated with our football club. That's now long gone. And I can see why in Jose Mourinho, with his charisma, his methodology, why he would be a very interesting option to turn to try and maximize what's left of this very expensive assembled squad, right? So I definitely understand where some of you guys might be coming from, and you might feel, listen, we need a guy who's going to cut all the, you know, nonsense away and focus on getting these guys performing to win, right? But I guess now I'll give my thoughts and opinions, and I think it's Mourinho's methodology behind winning. It's something I can't fully support, and I don't think it fully complements our squad at this point in time, because I think, to simply say it for what it is, I think he's always done his best work when he's working with players in their prime or players close to their prime. I think anyone under 23 years old typically isn't always excelling under Jose Mourinho. And I think now that the landscape has really evolved a lot more, where, you know, pressing and blocks has become even more prevalent, where a lot more teams now have energy and strength and power throughout many, many teams. Those advantages that worked Mourinho's favour back in the day aren't necessarily always working anymore. But to go on about Mourinho's methodology around winning and why I said why I can't support it, is simply because I think it exhausts too much from each team he's with. And then after you've given everything to win that one trophy or that one cup or to have that one great season, I think collapse always follows afterwards, because it's not a sustainable way of winning. And I think with what we're seeing with our new owners, with the players we're buying, with the long-term thinking and nature of this football club, sustainability is really the key words with Chelsea Football Club. We are trying to become a sustainably built team in terms of what we're doing with this potential multi-club network, where we can start siphoning talents that we already own from how many clubs we own that could potentially be first team stars or be sold on to sign other first team stars. It's why we have the academy we have, and it's why we've had the strategy when it comes to buying in the market that we've seen recently. And I just think that, unfortunately, when you assemble such a young team, you guys might not agree with me, but at least hear me out. I kind of feel like you need to have that Ranieri manager. You need that manager that's going to focus on improving the quality and caliber of the player, because that manager's not thinking about you right now. He's thinking about how you can be in 1, 2, 3 seasons time, right? And I say this because Mourinho, when he first took over as our manager in the 04-05 season, I think he has to really thank Ranieri for leaving him an incredibly, exciting talent pool of players to work with. Ranieri was the guy who bought Petr Cech and bought Arjen Robben. Ranieri is the guy that developed John Terry over like 4 years. Frank Lampard, he bought your Joe Coles. Now, he bought a lot of the spine that Mourinho would turn towards. And when Mourinho came in, he had such a spine to work with that all he had to do was buy the finishing pieces to assemble his army and to make us become that blue army that was, dominating Europe for that short little spell under him. That's when Mourinho's at his full best, when he's working with guys who are mature in their game. Guys who are seasons, who have kind of mastered their game. And the only thing they have left in their tank right now is that pursuit of silverware. That's why you can get these guys maybe to put in the extra work off the ball or to play a bit differently for the team. Like, for example, when Etu was playing as a winger in Inter Milan's famous treble-winning season. But unfortunately, I just don't think it works with players who haven't hit their peaks yet and who aren't close to hitting their peaks, because it becomes too much. The players lose too much of themselves in pursuit of the team. And, the team's lifespan is maybe 2 years max before the crash comes. And then you find yourself in a situation which Mourinho teams tend to fall in. And that is being left in situations where they must rebuild all over again. We can't afford to rebuild anymore. Sacrificing everything in the long term for the short term. And there were a few decisions I couldn't get behind. And it still makes me feel a bit fearful about potentially rehiring Mourinho again. I'm looking at Matt leaving. At the time when Matt left, I remember even speaking to my dad. People at the time kind of understood that, and the amount of people I knew that supported the Matt sale to Man United, it was baffling to me. And I've looked back in hindsight and I think if Matt wasn't sold in January in that 13-14 season, he was still at the club. Who knows? But maybe we have a greater season in that 13-14 season, yeah? And for someone like Mata to just be discarded, I thought that was a bit of a disgrace, in my opinion. And then I think what really just kind of sealed the deal for me was also the misuse of young talent we had. I'm sorry, De Bruyne, Salah, Lukaku. Listen, two of these guys are two of the best players in the Premier League. You can't be making mistakes like that to that type of level where you've allowed two of the best players in the league to leave for absolutely nothing. Because listen, at the time, everything we were doing was to be where Man City are currently at, to be the dominant force in the Prem and then the dominant force in Europe. That's the type of ambition we could show back then when the final pieces were there. We had all the pieces we needed, but I just didn't. Mourinho wasn't the guy to, create something beautiful from them. I'm sorry. In hindsight, people might think, but Nini, De Bruyne was too young. But Nini, Salah was too young. No. For me, I'm only going to speak my thing, yeah? It was Mourinho's use of the players. I'm sorry. De Bruyne coming on playing wide winger. What the hell's going on? I'm seeing Salah. He's an inside forward that plays close to goal. And you've got this guy receiving from the right back that far deep. And it's just like after one game you don't perform, you're out the team. It's not conducive towards success. And it's just like, what did it all materialize to? The season after, Oscar is out the door himself too. Everything was sacrificed for Oscar and his running off the ball, and then we pay the long-term price for missing out on proper world-class players that could have really changed the history of the football club back then. If we still had De Bruyne and Salah playing for us, yeah, like imagine what that could have been like alongside Eden Hazard. And to know that this was so close to coming to fruition and it was taken away due to, in my opinion, a style of football that just exhausts too much from the players. Is it any surprise why the 15-16 season was an absolute duds and an absolute flop? In hindsight, I don't think so. I just think that when we ended that 14-15 season winning the league, we ended it just parking the bus and defending. And I think after losing 4-2 to Spurs, there was something Mourinho that was like, I am going back to what I feel comfortable with. I'm not taking any risks here. And that whole end to the 14-15 season was essentially playing for results. And my thing is, playing for results has its benefits, but those benefits tend to be for knockout cup competitions. They don't tend to work in league games. And is it any surprise by Mourinho's most recent successes have been in more knockout round style matches, in knockout round football, in cup games and domestic games. That's where his football ideas really come to life. But I just don't think they translate now to league football anymore. Yeah, the nature of the game is too different. And as I was saying before, a lot of teams got power and strength and runners. It's become a lot more physical football over how many years now. And it's just like, unless you have like every, physical specimen freak playing for your team, physicality isn't the biggest advantage that it once was anymore. I just think that since those times where he's left us, I've not seen an evolution in Mourinho's ideas, and I'm not even seeing an improvement in his use of young players either. And ultimately it falls down to this. We've invested too much in these young guys for me to be hiring a manager that's going to get results out of them, but isn't going to take their game to the next level, isn't going to improve them, and isn't going to help them develop to become better in the future. Most of these guys after a while they tend to end up flopping. And most of them had to leave to be able to fulfill the potential that they always had. And unfortunately, Mourinho couldn't see and couldn't get the best out of. Now, that's my take around why Mourinho, for me, isn't the right hire if Pochettino was to get sacked. And in my opinion right now, I think my ultimate fear is simply this, For me, I've accepted the fate of this season. We could potentially find ourselves in a European spot come the ends. Fingers crossed, who knows, right? But it's not something I'm putting pressure on anyone to secure, because I think right now it's really about building a foundation now. We've not had a foundation in terms of a style now for like nearly 2 years. We need to have that. And I'd hate to be in a situation where Pochettino flops, he gets sacked, and then we're starting the 24-25 season again, back to square one, back to figuring out what type of team we want to be, how we want to play, what manager to bring the best out of that. And I think that if we were to go into another season having to do this rebuild again, it will never happen. And then I can see the club getting desperate for the short-term managers that will, make things look good for 1 year to 18 months. But then after that, you're forced to repeat the cycle time and time and time again. So I don't know. This Mourinho will always have a special place in my heart. The first time he was sacked, I was in actual tears when I was a kid. I think I bought every single newspaper that existed, just, detailing the story and discussing what went down. But I think as I've got older and after seeing some of the issues I had in the second time with us, the sales of matter, not having the foresight to see the talent and potential he had, and then the crash that subsequently came from that, I just have seen enough now with his times at Spurs and United and Roma to know that Mourinho, in my opinion, for his legacy, his genius, the moments, and the love and everything he's brought to this game, I respect if people feel like Mourinho would be the correct guy, but in my opinion, I just can't fall for this sentimentality again. I just think that right now, Mourinho's probably best suited now to international football. I think that's his best calling. Right now, for our future it doesn't involve Jose Mourinho, because Jose Mourinho is not going to take us into the future, sadly. And this young team doesn't need that type of coach right now. That's just going to bleed them dry. And then we, as a club, get left with nothing again in the long term. I just don't see it working like that anymore.